The air in the city smelled of expensive cologne and urgency. At the base of Thorne Towers, the most imposing monolith of steel in the skyline, stood a girl who looked like a crack in a diamond. Maya was 6 years old, but her eyes held the fatigue of a centenarian. Her feet were bare, the soles toughened by the scorching asphalt of the slums, and her dress was a faded rag that had seen too many washings. In her hand, she clutched a black nylon bag as if it contained the secret to eternal life. Inside that bag was a single crayon drawing and a heart full of desperate hope. That morning, the clinic nurse had been blunt. 24 hours, Maya. If the 200,000 naira isn't on my desk, your mother goes to the street. Her mother, Elena, was fading, her breath a rattling ghost in her chest. Maya didn't know how to beg. She had been taught that begging was for the defeated, and Maya was a fighter. She stepped through the revolving doors into a world of hyper-luxury. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silence, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of heels. People looked through her as if she were a smudge on a camera lens. The security guard, a man whose uniform was pressed with military precision, stepped into her path. "This isn't a shelter, kid. Move along before I call the authorities." Maya looked up, her lower lip trembling, but her gaze locked onto his. "I'm not a beggar, sir. I'm an applicant. I heard Mr. Elias Thorne is the most powerful man here. I've come to work for him." The guard's laughter was a sharp, jagged sound that echoed off the high ceilings. He reached for her shoulder to pivot her back toward the sun, but Maya planted her feet. She wasn't leaving, not while her mother's life was ticking away in a room that smelled of bleach and impending death. The commotion caught the eye of Sarah, the executive assistant to the CEO. Sarah lived in a world of spreadsheets and cold coffee, but she had never seen a child look at a security guard with such defiance. She approached the scene, her sharp suit a stark contrast to Maya's tattered appearance. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked, her voice a calm ripple in the tension. "The kid thinks she's a consultant," the guard sneered. "I'm clearing the floor." Sarah looked at Maya. The girl wasn't crying, though her eyes were rimmed with a deep, painful red. "What's in the bag, little one?" Sarah asked, kneeling so she was at eye level. The movement was a sign of respect that Maya hadn't received in years. Maya slowly reached into the nylon bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing of a man in a tall building and a girl holding a broom. "I can sweep, I can run, I can hold doors," Maya whispered. "My mommy is very sick, and the lady at the hospital said they will throw her out today. I don't want money for free. I want to earn it." Sarah's heart didn't just melt, it shattered. She knew Elias Thorne's schedule was a minefield of high-stakes mergers and hostile takeovers. She knew he was a man who viewed emotion as a structural weakness. But Sarah also knew that Elias hadn't smiled in 5 years, not since the tragedy that had hollowed him out. Ignoring the guards' protests and the confused stares of the junior partners, Sarah took Maya's small, dusty hand. "Come with me," she said softly. "The elevator to the top floor is a long ride. Tell me about your mommy." As the gold-plated doors slid shut, the lobby fell away, and Maya began her ascent into a world she had only seen in her dreams. The 80th floor was a silent fortress of glass. Here, the air was colder, filtered through expensive systems, and the view showed the entire world as if it were a toy set. Elias Thorne sat behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian. He was 40, with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed to calculate the cost of everything they landed on. He was currently signing a contract that would dismantle a rival shipping company. "I told you no interruption, Sarah," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. The sound of his own authority was usually enough to clear a room. "Sir, there's someone here who says she's your new hire," Sarah said, her voice betraying a hint of a tremor. Elias froze. He slowly lifted his head, his sharp gaze cut across the room. He expected a high-priced lawyer or a rogue board member. He did not expect a 6-year-old girl with dirt on her knees and a black nylon bag. He stared at Maya for a long beat, his face an unreadable mask. "Is this a joke, Sarah? Because if it is, it's a very expensive one for your career." Maya stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She didn't wait for Sarah to defend her. She walked right up to the obsidian desk and placed her drawing on top of the $1 million contract. "I'm Maya," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "My mommy is in the clinic, and they're going to chase her away. I will work for you every day until I'm old if you just help her stay in the bed." Elias looked at the drawing, then at the girl. For the first time in a decade, the billionaire found himself at a loss for words. Silence stretched in the office, thick enough to suffocate. Elias looked at the drawing. The lines were shaky, the colors of the crayons faded, but the intent was visceral. It was a contract of a different kind, one written in the language of pure, unadulterated love. He looked at Maya's feet, then at her face. She reminded him of someone, not in the features, but in the spirit. She had the eyes of a survivor. 5 years ago, Elias had lost his world. A car accident claimed his wife and his daughter, who would have been Maya's age now. Since then, he had built Thorne Towers as a tomb for his heart. He worked 20 hours a day so he didn't have to dream. But looking at Maya, he felt a ghost of a heartbeat. "Elias," his voice oddly strained, "cancel the 10 a.m. meeting with the London group." "Sir?" Sarah gasped. That meeting was worth billions. "Do it," he snapped, though there was no heat in it. He stood up, towering over the small girl. He reached out, and with a gentleness that would have shocked his board of directors, he took the drawing. He folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket, right over his heart. "You want to work, Maya? Fine. Your first job is to lead me to this clinic. We're going to see about your mother." Maya's eyes filled with tears, the first she had allowed herself all day. She reached out and grabbed his hand. Elias Thorne, the man who had sued world leaders and broken markets, let a dusty 6-year-old lead him out of his own building. The staff watched in stunned silence as the lion left his den, hand in hand with a child from the streets. The clinic was a nightmare. It was a low-slung building with peeling paint and the smell of rot. In the lobby, a nurse with a tired face and a sharp tongue was already gathering a woman's meager belongings into a pile. Elena lay on a gurney in the hallway, her face as pale as the sheets she was about to lose. Elias Thorne stepped through the door, and the air in the room seemed to change. His presence was a physical weight. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The nurse looked up, ready to snap, but the words died in her throat when she saw the suit, the watch, and the cold fire in his eyes. "Where is the administrator?" Elias asked. It wasn't a question, it was a command. I'm here," a man stammered, stepping out from a back office. "Sir, can I help you? This is a restricted area." Elias didn't answer. He looked at the 200,000 naira bill on the clipboard and then at Elena. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. "I want an ambulance at St. Mary's Clinic, now. Move a patient to the Thorne private wing at City General. I want the chief of medicine waiting on the curb. If she isn't there, I buy the hospital and fire her by noon." He hung up and looked at the nurse. "You were going to throw a dying woman into the street for the price of my lunch. You're finished here." Maya watched him, her jaw dropped. To her, he wasn't a billionaire. He was an angel with a very expensive phone. While Elias was transforming Maya's world, a storm was brewing back at Thorne Towers. Victoria, the chief operating officer, and a woman who had spent years trying to secure a place as the future Mrs. Thorne, was pacing her office. She had heard the rumors. The street rat had managed to get Elias to leave a $1 billion meeting. Victoria was brilliant, beautiful and utterly ruthless. She viewed Elias as a prize to be won, and Maya was an unpredictable variable she couldn't control. "Sarah," Victoria called out, stepping into the hallway, "where did he go with that child?" Sarah didn't back down. "He went to help her, Victoria, something you wouldn't understand." Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. "I understand that a CEO who loses his mind over a stray is a liability to the shareholders. Find out who she is. Find out where she came from. I want the dirt, Sarah. Every single speck of it." Victoria didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in leverage. She hired a private investigator before the sun had even set, giving him a single task: trace the girl back to the beginning. She wanted to prove that Maya was a plant, a scam, or a distraction. She didn't realize that in her quest to destroy the girl, she was about to pull the pin on a grenade that would blow her own life apart. She wanted the truth, but the truth was a monster she wasn't prepared to face. 2 days later, the hospital room was a different world. Elena was awake, her color returning thanks to the best medicine money could buy. She was sitting up, eating fresh fruit, while Maya sat on the edge of the bed, telling her stories about the big glass tower. Elias stood by the window, watching them. He felt a strange, terrifying warmth. The door burst open. Victoria walked in, followed by a man in a trench coat holding a thick file. She didn't look at Elena. She looked straight at Elias. "You've been played, Elias. This touching little story, it's a fraud." Elias's voice was like a glacier. "Get out, Victoria." "Not until you see this," she hissed, throwing the file onto the bed. "The woman isn't her mother. Elena found her 6 years ago abandoned behind a warehouse near the Royal Preston Club. She's a street pickup. There are no papers, no legal adoption. She's a nobody that this woman used to bait a billionaire." Maya's face fell. She looked at Elena, her eyes wide with fear. Elena began to cry, her hands shaking. "It's true, I found her," Elena whispered. "But I didn't bait anyone. I loved her. I was the only one who heard her crying that night." The mention of the Royal Preston Club hit Elias like a physical blow. His mind raced back to a night 6 years ago, a night of grief, a night of drinking to forget his lost family, a night with a woman whose name he never knew. He looked at Maya. He looked at her eyes. He saw the fire. He saw the steel. And then he saw himself. "Sarah," Elias said, his voice a whisper, "get the DNA kit, now." The wait for the results was the longest 48 hours of Elias's life. He didn't go back to the office. He stayed at the hospital, sitting in the hallway, his head in his hands. Victoria's revelation had been intended to poison him against Maya, but it had done the opposite. It had opened a door in his memory that he had kept locked and bolted. When the doctor finally walked down the hall, he was holding a single white envelope. He didn't say a word. He just handed it to Elias. Elias tore it open with trembling fingers. Paternity match 99.98%. The world stopped spinning. The billionaire, the man of ice, fell to his knees in the sterile hospital corridor. He wasn't crying because of the scam. He was crying because the universe had given him back what he thought was lost forever. He had a daughter. The girl who had walked into his office to wash his shoes was his own flesh and blood. He didn't run to the lawyers. He didn't call a press conference. He walked into the room where Maya was coloring quietly at the small table. He knelt beside her and took her hands. "Maya," he said, his voice breaking, "I asked for a job, but I have something else for you. I'm not just the man from the tower. I'm your father." Maya looked at him, her small brow furrowing. "My daddy?" "Yes," Elias whispered, pulling her into a hug that felt like the closing of a wound. "Your daddy, and I'm never letting you go again." The news of Elias's illegitimate child hit the company like a tidal wave. Victoria wasn't finished. She had leaked the story to the press, hoping the scandal would force the board of directors to remove him as CEO. She sat at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by gray-haired men in suits who cared only about stock prices. "He's compromised," Victoria argued, her voice full of feigned concern. "He's bringing street children into the executive suite. The Thorne Group cannot be run by a man who lets his emotions dictate his billion-dollar decisions. We need a vote of no confidence." The board members murmured in agreement. The stock had dipped 2 points on the news. They were ready to sign the papers to oust him. The double doors of the boardroom swung open. Elias walked in. He wasn't alone. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, and beside him, Maya was dressed in a matching little blazer. She looked like a miniature executive, her head held high. Elias walked to his seat at the head of the table, and for the first time in years, he looked the board members in the eye with a smile that terrified them. "I hear there's a vote," Elias said, leaning back. "But before you sign anything, you should know one thing. I don't just own 51% of this company's stock. I own the building, the land it sits on, and the debt of every man in this room. If you want to talk about liabilities, let's talk about yours." He placed the DNA results on the table. "This isn't a scandal. This is the future of the Thorne Group. Meet my heir." Victoria's face went from pale to ashen. She had played her hand and lost, but she was a woman who didn't know how to surrender. "This is a circus, Elias. You're using a child as a shield," she screamed, her composure finally breaking. Elias didn't even look at her. He looked at Maya. "Maya, what do we say to people who shout?" Maya looked at Victoria with a calmness that was eerie. "My mommy Elena says people only shout when they are afraid inside. You don't have to be afraid, ma'am. My daddy is a good man." The board members looked at each other. The tension in the room shifted. The scandal was suddenly a human interest story of the century. The billionaire who found his lost daughter. The stock price began to climb in real time as the narrative hit social media. "Victoria," Elias said, his voice cold and final, "you've spent 5 years trying to find a way into my life. You finally found one, but it's the way out. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your things. If you ever speak Maya's name again, I will dedicate my entire fortune to ensuring you never work in this industry again." Victoria looked around the room, but no one would meet her eyes. She had been the queen of Thorne Towers, but she was being exiled by a child. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elias didn't just move Maya into his mansion, he brought Elena too. He bought a beautiful estate for her within the same gates, ensuring she had her own independence and the best medical care for life. Elias realized that his life had been a series of transactions, but Maya had taught him about investment. He launched the Maya Thorne Foundation, a billion-dollar initiative to fund clinics in the slums and ensure that no child ever had to walk barefoot into an office to save their mother's life. Maya's first day as special assistant was a legendary event. She had her own small desk in Elias's office, equipped with the world's best crayons and a juice box dispenser. She sat through meetings with international bankers, coloring her pictures and occasionally offering her expert advice. "Sir Thorne," a German banker asked during a tense negotiation, "we are stuck on the interest rates." Maya looked up from her coloring book. "If you share, everyone is happy," she said, before going back to her drawing of a butterfly. Elias laughed, a sound that Sarah still found miraculous. "You heard her, gentlemen. Let's share. 4.2% or we walk." The bankers, charmed and slightly intimidated by the child's presence, agreed within minutes. Maya was the secret weapon Elias never knew he needed. She wasn't just his daughter, she was his conscience. One evening, Elias took Maya back to the warehouse behind the Royal Preston Club. He wanted her to know that her past wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was the foundation of her strength. They stood in the quiet alley, the neon lights of the city glowing in the distance. "This is where you started," Elias said, his hand resting on her shoulder, "but it doesn't define where you're going." Maya looked at the dusty ground. "I remember being cold, and then I remember Mommy Elena's voice. She smelled like soap." Elias knelt beside her. "I wasn't there that night. I spent 6 years being a man I didn't like. but the minute you walked into my office, you saved me. You think you came to find a job, but you really came to find a father who was lost." They stood there for a long time, the billionaire and the girl from the slums, two pieces of a puzzle that had finally clicked into place. Elias made a silent vow to the woman who had left Maya there, wherever she was, that he would spend every second of his life making up for that night. He wasn't just a mogul anymore. He was a man with a purpose, and that purpose had a name. Months later, a gala was held to celebrate the success of the foundation. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite. At the back of the room, a woman stood in a simple dress, looking hesitant. It was Victoria. She had lost her job, her status, and her pride. She had spent the months in reflection, realizing that her ambition had turned her into a monster. She approached Elias, who was standing with Elena and Maya. The security guards moved to block her, but Elias signaled them to wait. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Victoria said, her voice small. I wanted to see her." She looked at Maya. "I was wrong about you. I thought you were a threat to what I wanted. I didn't realize you were exactly what this city needed." Maya walked over to her. She didn't see the woman who had tried to get her ejected. She saw a person who was sad. She reached out and gave her a small, hand-drawn flower. "It's okay," Maya said. "My daddy says everyone gets a second chance." Victoria broke down, the Iron Lady finally dissolving into tears. Elias didn't offer her a job, but he offered her something better, a path to redemption. He invited her to volunteer for the foundation. It was the first step in Victoria becoming a human being again. The cycle of coldness in Thorne Towers had finally been broken. The story of the girl in the black nylon bag became a legend in the city. Maya Thorne grew up not as a spoiled heiress, but as a leader who never forgot the feeling of hot asphalt under her feet. She and Elias were inseparable, a duo that changed the landscape of the city's business and its heart. Elena remained the soul of the family, the bridge between the world of the slums and the world of the towers. She taught Elias that wealth wasn't measured in naira, but in the number of people you could lift up with you. On Maya's 12th birthday, she stood on the balcony of Thorne Towers with her father. The city below was glowing, and for the first time, it didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a home. "Are you happy, Maya?" Elias asked, looking down at the girl who had changed his life. Maya leaned her head against his arm. "I have my mommy Elena, I have you, and no one is being chased out of the hospital today. I'm very happy, Daddy." Elias looked out at the horizon. He still had the crayon drawing in his desk, the one she had brought him on that bright Monday morning. It was his most prized possession, worth more than the building they stood in. He had realized that the greatest job he ever took on wasn't being a CEO, it was being a father. As the sun set, the glass tower didn't look cold anymore. It looked like a lighthouse, shining for every child still waiting for their door to open. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!